Analysts. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hey, welcome along. A packed show for you. We have all the big stories. Another day, another hotel, another cohort of young, fit, single men in the heart of an English town centre. And redefining thousands of military-age males from holiday destinations as victims of persecution has certain consequences, among which is the obvious. They squeeze out any coverage of real victims of real persecution. Plus, do you like the new economy? You're a lot poorer, and a few fellas with the private jets are an awful lot richer. And Samantha Smith is here to talk about the desecration of war memorials across the kingdom in Scotland, Wales, England, Northern Ireland. Plus, of course, the most important part of the show, that is you. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at gbnews. It's all coming up after Polly Middlehurst with the latest news. Polly.
Mark, thank you and good evening to you. And we start tonight's bulletin with the news that in the last hour, firefighters in eastern Poland have said that 2 people have died in an explosion near the Ukraine border. It comes after unverified local media reports suggested 2 stray missiles had hit a grain store in Przewodów. That's a village in the east of the country. Russia's defence ministry has denied the reports and called it an act of deliberate provocation. Meanwhile, Poland's Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki has reportedly called an urgent national security and defence meeting. He's due to make a statement within the hour. We'll bring you the detail of that, of course, when we get it. Meanwhile, in the latest fighting in Ukraine, Russia has launched around 100 missiles at Ukrainian cities today in what Kyiv is calling the heaviest wave of strikes since the start of the war. In a video address, Volodymyr Zelensky said the attacks have hit emergency infrastructure, leaving it in a critical condition. And the Prime Minister has been speaking at the G20 summit in Indonesia today, and he's told GB News dealing with illegal migration is his #1 challenge. Rishi Sunak also said he wanted to reduce legal net migration, but refused to say by how much. The UK signed a deal with France last week in an effort to boost cross-channel cooperation on the matter. It comes as the National Crime Agency told GB News many Albanian criminals are falsely claiming they've been trafficked to the UK against their will. Mr Sunak says tackling migrant crossings is a priority.
Right now, our number one challenge is getting a grip of the number of illegal migrants coming, and that's the thing I want to focus on first. I think that's what, by the way, the British public rightly want us to focus on. Our deal with the French this week is the first in a series of things that we'll need to do, but people should rest assured that this is a huge priority for me.
The Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, says the death of a toddler who suffered prolonged exposure to mould is an unacceptable tragedy. 2-year-old Awa Bishak, who lived in a one-bed council flat in Greater Manchester, died from a respiratory condition directly caused by the mould in December 2020. Rochdale Coroner's Court heard the little boy's father had complained to the local council and was told just to paint over it. Mr Gove says he's demanding answers.
It seems to me inconceivable that the chief executive of a housing association, earning, north of £150,000, who's responsible for decent homes in Rochdale, the fact that this case was raised by Alice's father years ago, the fact that he had to get a solicitor on the case in order to try to make sure that he and his family were living in a decent home, the fact that they did nothing and hid behind procedure, I mean, honestly, it beggars belief that this guy is still in office. He's coming here in order to explain to me why it was that this tragedy was allowed to happen.
You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. Now it's time for Mark Steyn.
Thank you, Polly. Before we get on to the other stories tonight, as Polly was saying, there are reports that a Russian missile, or at least a missile, has landed in Poland near the Ukraine border and has apparently killed a couple of people, according to Polish firemen. They're certainly taking it seriously among Polish politicians. Let's go to Colonel Richard Kemp, CBE, who had a distinguished career with the British Army in Afghanistan and elsewhere. What do you make of these reports, Richard?
Well, it's obviously hard to know what to make of them, but I guess it appears that the missile or missiles that hit Poland were fired at the same time as a barrage of rockets fired by Russia into Lvov nearby, near the Polish border. And I would, my guess, without too many facts, would be that this was an accidental attack on Poland by these Russian missiles. Missiles tend to do, even the most sophisticated missiles, bombs, etc., tend to do the most unexpected things, and I would imagine it's unlikely Russia would have deliberately sent missiles into Poland, so it looks most likely to have been an accidental attack.
Is that really the case, though? I mean, we understand when Kim Jong-un looses off a couple of nukes that they clear the perimeter fence and then can go in all kinds of directions because he's not very good at it. Are you saying that the same thing would apply to Russian missile? Because this is a village 4 miles from the border. It's actually possible to accidentally overshoot that much.
Yeah, it certainly is, and it happens not infrequently. When the Russians fired something like 100 missiles into Ukraine today, it was, I think, the largest or one of the largest bombardments they've launched since the war began. And to be honest, it doesn't surprise me that one would have gone, or maybe more than one would have gone astray, and even by such a large margin of that. Russian missiles, whether it's Russian or American or British missiles, they're not 100% reliable. They're pretty reliable, but they can go wrong. And I think this probably is what we're here. It doesn't seem, no other explanation seems logical. It doesn't make any sense for the Russians just to fire a missile into Ukrainian farmland for without any other action taking place.
Well, there is one reason, isn't there? It's a psychological reason rather than a strategic one. But they've just lost their principal acquisition since this war began, which is the town of Kherson. And the thinking might well be that you need to do something to show you're still in the game. And if this is all you have to hand, this is what you do. I mean, it is odd that the war is going well for Ukraine militarily on the ground, and yet we saw with the pipeline explosions in the Baltic and now this development that there's weird kind of attempts at expanding the war that are always going on.
Yeah, you know, it's a possibility, of course, but it's not it's not really what actually happened as far as we understand. It isn't particularly logical, even in that context. I know that you can't sort of necessarily attribute the most clear logic to President Putin and his people, but that is a possibility. But I think it's not very likely. I think there would be other more effective forms of attack they could carry out if they specifically wanted to attack Poland and maybe draw Poland even further into the conflict than they are. They're already heavily involved. They've provided massive amount of support to Ukraine in very many different ways. But it doesn't look like to me. I mean, you know, could be wrong. It doesn't look like a deliberate attack against Poland. And people who are saying, I've heard many people saying this evening that this means NATO is at war with Russia. It doesn't actually mean that. If it was believed by Poland or, you know, the US, NATO, that this was a deliberate attack on Poland, then yes, it could, you know, there might be a need for some form of NATO retaliation. But if it was in fact accidental, then it doesn't invoke NATO Article 5, doesn't constitute a deliberate attack against a NATO member.
So just to be clear on that point, because that's most non-Ukrainians' principal and non-Poles' principal interest in it, this idea that there's an automatic invocation of Article 5 and suddenly we're in World War III with Russia. As long as everyone agrees this was accidental, it's just one of those things.
That's correct. I think so. And it doesn't happen infrequently where one country will carry out, let's say, you know, we've had occasions when airplanes have been shot down, and that hasn't led to war because it's been done by accident in some cases. It's a you know, it's a blurred issue, but I think if for example Poland wanted to go to war with Russia and wanted NATO to go with Russia, then Poland perhaps could make a case on the basis of this for doing so. I don't think they're very likely to do that, and I don't think NATO is going to go along with it either, because it's not really in either Poland's or NATO's interests to be at war with Russia now. Russia is you know, they're not necessarily completely lost the war, but they're certainly not making good progress in the war. They're on the back foot at the moment. I don't think there's a motivation for NATO to use this as a justification to initiate direct hostilities.
Okay, well, that's very good to know. Thank you, Colonel Kemp. We'll all be relieved to hear that World War III is not on the cards in the next 24 hours, but we will be interested to see what exactly the Polish investigators find, who these missiles are from, and how they came to land where they did. 2 Poles are dead because of it. Before we gallop on to the rest of the menu, a couple of updates on stories we've been covering. 1 week ago today, it was US Election Day. 7 days later, they still cannot tell us who won. I checked in on the 3rd Congressional District of California, which for days has been stalled on 36% of the vote. Good news, they've now picked up the pace and are up to 53% of the vote. As you can see here, it's still neck and neck, so at the current rate of counting, we won't know for another week. This is not a system of representative election that should command any respect from the rest of the world. At best, it's incompetent. At worst, it's corrupt. And until they clean up their own house, we should pay no attention to anything the US State Department says about elections in Belarus or Sudan or anywhere else. On the other hand, maybe elections don't matter. Yesterday, we mentioned Boris Johnson's father, Stanley. Familiar face on these airwaves, and his casual revelation that under some mysterious, quote, national plan, he referenced, you won't be allowed to get on a plane. Well, they've just been holding the G20 plus the B20, which is apparently the business version of the G20. Do you know who's in the G20? It's Britain, America, Russia, China, France, Canada. Yes, but Klaus Schwab, the sinister Teutonic megalomaniac hiding in plain sight as a sinister Teutonic megalomaniac, was also there. So I guess Davos, despite being a small sub-jurisdiction of a Swiss canton, must be a member of the G22 now. So Oberbürgermeister to the planet, Schwab gave a keynote address to the various presidents and prime ministers laying out his plans for the world.
What we have to confront is a deep, systemic and structural restructuring of our world. And this will take some time. And the world will look differently after we have gone through this transition process.
Nice of him to give us a heads up. My problem with Klaus Schwab getting together with all the clever expert types to remake the planet is that the smart set have had the last 3 years all to themselves and have wrecked everything in sight. We have reported all year on the so-called COVID vaccines and their victims, and the pom-pom girls of the propaganda media have done you no favours by propping up the disintegrating fairy tale. For all you media big shots still invested in the fairy tale, here's where this story is heading. Headline from the Daily Mail. Pfizer and Moderna launched trials to track whether health issues arise years after getting their COVID vaccines. We've interviewed Vicky Spitt and Charlotte Wright, whose husbands died days after getting their jabs, but we've also interviewed doctors who've explained that the damage done can do long-term heart damage that might not kill you for 5 or 10 years. And Pfizer and Moderna are now acknowledging that possibility by conducting these trials. 2 years late, you might say. But those bodies, Facebook, Full Fact, Ofcom, still clinging to the official narrative like Monica Lewinsky hanging off Bill Clinton's zipper, are trying to prop up something that is no longer prop-upable. Yesterday, John Watt was on this show. He's been crippled by the Pfizer, then been further injured by the ghastly groupthink of Britain's awful monomedia. And in the course of his appearance, he made a throwaway aside about the attitude to the jab crippled by a couple of our pal Dan Wootton's guests, one of whom wasn't happy about it. Tweet from the iPaper's Benjamin Butterworth. Do you really think it is acceptable or professional to let a guest throw nasty playground insults and not take them up on it, Mark Steyn? Mr. Butterworth warned to his theme, he let a guest call me a bleep hole. This is not a serious discussion. Mark Steyn is pathetic. I'm not sure that bleep hole charge is strictly true, but feel free to make an Ofcom complaint about it. Here's the point, since you've just demonstrated it so brilliantly. Do you really think it is, quote, acceptable or professional or even seemly to take an interview with a bloke who's been crippled by this bloody jab and make it all about you? Even by the standards of British media narcissism, that seems unusually self-absorbed. And yet you thinking it's all about you really explains where so much of this has gone horribly wrong. You and he were both healthy young men who had no particular need of this medical intervention, but you were told by everyone, from the Queen down, to do the right thing, so you both did. And so far it's working out for you, which is grand, and I hope it keeps working out for you, but it's not working out for poor old John Watt. His recurring symptoms include nausea, severe acid reflux, stomach pain, diarrhea, fatigue, weight loss, dizziness, tachycardia on standing, high blood pressure, slurred speech, brain fog, seizures, jolts, head pressure, chest pain, vertigo, blackouts, breathlessness, chest pain, heart palpitations. I could go on and on. We're about 2/3 of the way through that list of symptoms. And your attitude, the attitude of the groupthink media to your fellow citizens killed and crippled by irresponsible and actually criminally negligent public policy, is creepy and heartless. What you need to do is just admit you called it wrong and recognise John and Vicky and Charlotte and all the rest as fellow members of the British family, rather than apostates at odds with your weird and creepy neo-religion of the Pfizer. Mr. Butterworth is welcome on this show, although I know Dan guards his regulars very zealously. Last week we sent the Mark Steyn Show cameras round to the Atrium Hotel at Heathrow, where thousands of young male, quote, asylum seekers are holed up at taxpayer expense. Some came by boat, some came by lorry, some came by plane. But the migrant tide is accelerating. 2,000 more young men arrived on the southern shore just in the last 72 hours. That works out about 250,000 a year, or about the equivalent of Newcastle or Londonderry? I mention the latter because after all these years, it might be fun to add a new wrinkle to the Irish question and move in the next 12 months' intake of fit young lads to make the official recitation of the city's name even more cumbersome. Derry/Londonderry/Allahu Akbari. But what's happening at that Heathrow hotel is going on all over the country. Paul Bristow, the member for Peterborough, tweeted, I think this was yesterday, last night 80 single men were placed in the Great Northern Hotel. Oh, and no sooner had he tweeted that than we learned that a second Peterborough hotel, the Verve, not as attractive architecturally, not as historic, but that's housing another 54 young men. Paul Bristow joins me now. Basically, you guys and the council don't find out about any of this until it's a done deal.
Well, that's right, Mark. Unfortunately, you were only told about 12 hours before this is due to occur. I sat down with the local council, some of our officers, in the morning. We planned our response because this is a multi-agency issue. We need to talk to the police, we need to talk to healthcare professionals, support services, local charities who deal with asylum seekers and refugees. But what we don't have is the time to do this. And quite frankly, it's a breach of planning law as well. If you're turning a hotel into a hostel, that requires planning permission. And that needs to be absolutely clear. They're breaking planning policy by doing this. But unfortunately, the council has very little time to react, and it's a great shame.
No, that's actually a very important point. Anybody who's had any dealings with planning permission authorities, if they just want to put a granny flat on top of the garage or whatever, knows what that's like. Yet somehow the essential character and purpose of huge public buildings in the heart of town can basically be changed without the council say so.
That's right, and it's not right. And the council did put an injunction. We are going to go to court, but I know several other councils have gone down that route with varying degrees of success. In fact, I think some were rejected only very recently.
Yep, that's just a couple of days ago. Yeah.
That's right. So just give you a little bit of context here. The hotel that I've talked about most openly is the Great Northern Hotel. It's the first thing you see as you leave Peterborough Station. It's the gateway to our city. And this is a smart hotel, often used for weddings, for dinners, for receptions, for that sort of thing. This is not a budget hotel. It's got marble floors, it's got ensuite bathrooms. This has been seen in the past as one of Peterborough's premium hotels. And for that to be turned into a place for 80 single men who have crossed the channel on boats, it's completely inappropriate. And everyone from public health officials to local police to even charities who support asylum seekers agree that this is the wrong hotel in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Now, when you say that, though, you then get insulted by your fellow MPs as some kind of racist. I mean, whatever it is now, 60%, I think, of these people are Albanian, which is the same race as most people in the UK. But for some reason, that's the standard slur thrown at you by opposition MPs.
Well, that's right. Peterborough's got a fine history of supporting refugee families and asylum seekers, over the years. We're well used to doing this. We're already looking after over 300 such individuals. But putting this on top is well, it's stretching resources. But it gets worse than that, Mark. It's not only people telling you that you can't say what you're saying in a really responsible way, saying this is inappropriate. The Guardian today ran a story supported by a Labour spokesman and supported by local Labour councillors in my patch, saying that I and other MPs shouldn't name the hotels. Apparently, we're inciting violence against these individuals.
So what kind of state has British democracy reached then, when thousands of people can be moved into hotels? They're in the centre of town. People notice something is different. They notice that instead of a wedding, there's lots of fit young men hanging around outside. But you're not allowed to talk about it. Why is The Guardian arguing for official silence on this?
Well, you better ask The Guardian, but apparently it's because there was obviously that attack on the centre down in Kent. Obviously, no one's justifying that. That was a totally wicked thing to do, and that individual was wrong to do so.
Well, he's dead. I mean, that's the thing. It's what he did was a slightly more elaborate act of suicide, in which he took himself out. but has now become blamed for some kind of mythical terrorist movement.
But there's two or three things to say about this. The first is that transparency is the key to everything. It leads to better decision making. I think it's absolutely right that everybody knows what's going on in their city, insofar as there's nothing legal about it. Secondly, it requires planning permission, as I said. The council would have to announce this because, you know, hopefully there'll be an application to change the use, and so it will become public knowledge anyway. But also, a city centre location for 80 young men is not suitable for the young men themselves either, because they'll be at risk of criminal exploitation, they'll be at risk of other factors. It's not right for the young men, it's not right for the city, it's not right for the taxpayer, and it's certainly not right for the existing asylum and refugee population either.
But the fellows at The Guardian would say, well, you're worrying about what people see when they come out of the railway station, you're worrying about tourism, and this is some, you know, human rights tragedy. Why are you prioritising tourism and whether Peterborough gets to win the Beautiful Britain Award this year, as opposed to worrying about all the human rights stuff?
Well, Mark, what's happening now and what's happened in the past are two very different things. The existing asylum seeker population and refugee population in Peterborough, quite often are families, quite often women, and quite often people have been here for some time waiting for a decision. Now, that needs speeding up. I completely accept that. But what we're talking about now is criminal gangs ferrying people across the Channel, typically fit young men. Some people are flying from other parts of Europe to Belgium and then suddenly coming onto the English coast and being ferried across. I don't know what happens to their documentation when they suddenly appear in England. What is happening now is very different, and that's widely accepted and widely understood. So for some people then to turn this into a typical asylum or seeker or refugee situation is completely inappropriate.
No, you're right on that. Thank you very much, Paul. Let me know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk. We'll get to that next. Plus, just to put a button on what we were talking about, these are essentially economic migrants in their tens and then hundreds of thousands. We all know it. Meanwhile, you never hear a word from victims of real tyranny, but we're going to do a bit of that tonight. Also, are you broke enough yet? Underneath all the We Are the World collectivist mumbo-jumbo, there's a massive drain of wealth going on from you to the mega-rich. That's all coming up after the break. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me. Noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
GB News is the People's Channel, so let's channel what the people... Wait a minute, what am I talking about? Oh, here we go. Yeah, is the government prioritising migrants over the citizens of this great nation? Yvonne says yes. When you go to work in the morning, think of those who arrive by dinghy. They're uninvited. You get to keep them because the government supports them over you with your taxes in hotels that can no longer offer you a room. John says if you have to sleep in a shop doorway rather than a 4-star hotel, then the answer is obviously yes. Crispin says, what an utterly stupid question. That's the response I would expect from a chap called Crispin. Not that I'm prejudging your Christian name, Crispin, or your Crispin name, Christian. What an utterly stupid question. If the government was prioritising immigrants, they wouldn't be taking nearly 3 years to process applications. That should only take 3 months to process, says Crispin. Let me tell you something, Crispin. If you're taking 3 years to process an application during which people are fed and housed at government expense, you don't actually need permission after 3 years. You're already living in the country. Chris says, is the government prioritising migrants over their own people? No, they're looking after the rich and powerful very well. One of the first decisions made under the emergency measures of March 2020 was the classification of everyone into essential or non-essential. Do you own a nice little shop in the high street? Well, you seem pretty totally non-essential to me, whereas Jeff Bezos at Amazon is totally essential. So for want of any alternatives, everyone just bought from him instead. So he got even richer while your shop closed down. What's going on? Here's how James Melville put it. The last 2 years have seen the biggest transfer of wealth to the super rich in history. Government, media, technocratic and corporate agendas are being dressed up as virtue smokescreens for a massive asset grab that is responsible for so much human misery. It's a giant con trick. James joins me now. It's that obvious, isn't it?
It is for us, but not for most people. It's under the smokescreen of virtue. If you look at, for instance, the top 10 richest people in the world have doubled their wealth over the pandemic, but 99% have seen a decrease in wealth in real terms. And the auspice of virtue keeps coming up, whether it's stay safe, it's for your security, it's for your own good. Now, there's a number of lessons of history that we know, and one of them is about virtue and about authoritarianism, using virtue under the auspices of staying safe. And people have gone along with this. And I'm staggered as someone who sits on the left of centre, even though a lot of people will say now that actually I'm some sort of far-right conspiracy theorist, which I'm not. My views are fundamentally the same. Most people are looking at this from the left, and they're getting hoodwinked by governments, by technocrats, and by a lot of the media into following this narrative. I mean, if someone had said on the left 20 years ago that somehow they would slavishly be supporting aspects of our big media, billionaires, and also big pharma, what has happened to the left in all of this? So I see it very much as the left has left me, but I'm still left on the left. And I think we're in a situation where people are being bamboozled. I think it was Carl Sagan said the art of the bamboozle to get people on side. And so people are not really sure what is right and what is wrong, but the one thing they are following is narratives of virtue. Right. It's not. If you look at, for instance, the Great Reset, I mean, that's something that if you say the Great Reset, you're smeared as being a conspiracy theorist as well. The Great
Even though Klaus Schwab actually stands up at the G20 and announces it.
Yeah, and Bill Gates as well. But if we go back a few years, they were talking about this. This is not just a random press release. Well, it's not even smoke and mirrors. It's all out in the open. And so we need to move from this narrative that people are seen as conspiracy theorists for talking about stuff that's actually a conspiracy agenda. And it's under the auspices of virtue to get people on side, to do good, to be a good person. But actually what we need to do is take a step back from that and realise that it's a massive asset grab. If you look at land, you look at money, you look at data, you look at people's health, autonomy, it's all under this, where they're trying to control us, take away our freedoms, and what's going to be left at the end? We own nothing, but we're happy? No, we'll own nothing and be miserable, but the billionaires, the technocrats, will be happy because they'll obtain more assets, more money, potentially more access to people's data, and fundamentally more control and more power.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually already underway now. And the fact that we live in a 24/7 panopticon surveillance society means that the longer we let this go without doing anything, the harder it will be to push back against it.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the cost of living crisis would be the time that we could unite everyone. If you look at the pandemic, vaccine passports, vaccine, or even going back even further, things like Brexit, it was a very divisive thing. But the cost of living crisis is something that should unite people. And unite people in terms of who are we actually going to blame here? It's not about people making their own personal decisions, because they want that. They want divide and rule. That's another playbook trick. But what we need to do is focus our attentions and get our message out about what is causing the problem. If you look at the irony that the government, probably in the next few days, are going to announce tax hikes for everyone, combined with another raft of austerity 2.0. So we're effectively going to pay for their own financial mismanagement. People should not accept that, and they should be asking questions about why this has happened. Now, in terms of where we're at in terms of finances, part of the reason this has happened is because they have spent money, a lot of money, through the pandemic on a lot of things that didn't work. For instance, remember track and trace and test?
Right.
It was £37 billion worth for something that was a failed platform.
Well, if you add it all up, I mean, basically they threw £500 billion into the Thames and watched it float out to sea. Why are we still accepting that we are governed by wise experts?
Yeah, well, it's that follow the science, isn't it? I mean, but science is not so much a settled will. It's always questionable, and we need to ask those questions. If you look at, for instance, quantitative easing, 500 billion was pumped into our economy over the last 2 years. That is a major conduit to why, for instance, we're in this mess in terms of inflation and the cost of living crisis.
Yeah, but like a 12-year-old doing his, economics for dummies first class could have figured that out, but the great genius Rishi Sunak couldn't. At some point, you're going to lose. If this new world they're building actually is erected and the planks are put in place, it's going to be very hard to dismantle. Thank you very much, James. It's great to see you here in person. Samantha Smith is here to talk about the spate of desecrations of war memorials across the kingdom. That's straight ahead on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations. for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
What is it today? It's November the 15th. So we're only 4 days after the 11th hour of the 11th day after the 11th month. And today, the War Memorial, the poppies at the War Memorial in Edinburgh were destroyed in an act of arson. Let's have a look. Let's not look at the cenotaph. That's when it's all working. It's all solemn and dignified. We're talking now about whatever it is, 2-3 days later, all burned. And in the War Memorial at Edinburgh. Can we show those poppies, those poppy wreaths incinerated? Have you got them? Look at these things. They're ashen grey because they were burned. Similar attacks in all the home nations of this kingdom, in Northern Ireland, in Wales and in England. What's going on? Our friend Samantha Smith is here. What do you make of this, Samantha?
Well, I think that something like this has been a long time coming. This is the result of years and years of anti-British propaganda, disunity and disinformation perpetrated by the so-called progressive left, particularly in Scotland, as we've seen with the Edinburgh War Memorial. This is, I'd say, the responsibility falls at the feet of the SNP. Last week we saw poppies being worn by SNP members of Parliament, members of Scottish Parliament, saying vote yes, flying completely in the face of what Remembrance Day is intended to be about. Remembering the brave men and women that gave their lives fighting for our freedom and our democracy. The SNP and other so-called progressives, the Be Kind Brigade that we know and love so much, have desecrated every aspect of our history and our national identity. Nothing is safe. We've seen statues, museums, memorials, all targeted by vandals and arsonists.
Do you think that's basically an indulgence of the left because they can tear down statues in various parts of the country and indulgent judges will let them get away with it? Do you think that this is all then part of a logical continuum? You don't like the statue of this particular bloke, so you tear it down. And to your surprise, suddenly all British history is suspect, including the most solemn occasion of the year.
Exactly. I think that what we're seeing is the normalization of criminal behavior and vandalism. Let's treat these criminals like what they are. They aren't protesters. They aren't activists. They're criminals, and they deserve to be locked in jail and have their key thrown away. Frankly, there's nothing more disrespectful to British society and to the public and to the fabric of our very nation than desecrating war memorials. Whether or not you agree with the personal politics of the Conservative Party or the Labour Party or the SNP or whoever, that gives you no excuse to desecrate the memorials of those brave servicemen and women who gave their everything for our freedom and our democracy. They gave their lives for people to have the freedom to go and burn down the poppies on their own memorials. It's just absolutely outrageous that this sort of behaviour is being condoned and normalised in society today.
Well, that's an interesting way of looking at it, but they did indeed give their lives. Whether they gave their lives for the fractious, self-loathing hellhole, tribalised hellhole of modern Britain, where people are essentially at war with their own history, where 80% of young people do not have a positive view of the Prime Minister who led us to victory in the Second World War. Maybe it's just as simple as the fact we no longer have enough in common even to agree that these war memorials are a good thing. You know, if you don't have anything in common, it's hard to have common sense.
I think this entire issue, so with Just Stop Oil protesters, with the Albanians wrapping their flag around Churchill's statue, with the burning of poppy wreaths in the Edinburgh War Memorial and others around the country, this is the definition of first world problems. In my opinion, the so-called progressive left are trying to rip the very fabric of our nation apart. Nothing is safe until we are completely miserable and self-loathing and paying reparations for the rest of our lives, for crimes that we did not commit, for sins that we have no bearing on, for this ridiculous culture war that seems to be more intent on tearing down the things that this nation built ourselves up on, the pride, the democracy, the history of our very nation is being threatened by those who would see it burn to the ground in an instant, as we've seen with the Edinburgh War Memorials.
Well, that's very true. But to honour the past, it has to be your past. You mentioned the Albanians. Obviously, if you just got off a dinghy at Folkestone, this isn't your past, the Edinburgh War Memorial. But increasingly, for a large number of English, Scottish, Irish, Welsh people lived here all their lives, they reject this shared past too, and that is an issue. Thank you very much, Samantha. It's always good to see you. While the left is redefining fleeing persecution to cover the 1,000 strapping young lads arriving every night from France, there are real victims of persecution out there. Up next on The Mark Steyn Show.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage.
At 8, join Mark Steyn. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
I mentioned just now the left's cynical redefinition of political refugees, those 1,000 butch boys on the beach fleeing France, are the equivalent of those broad-shouldered, small-breasted transgender swimmers winning all the championships in America. It's refugee drag queenery, or travesti, as our French friends would say. While they're hogging all the fancy hotels, there are real victims of persecution out there. In Iran, protests are ongoing, but the first of maybe 15,000 detainees has been sentenced to death for, quote, enmity against God. You do not want to be a young single female so sentenced, because before your execution, you will be raped to ensure you are too unclean to be admitted to heaven. Maya Tusi, a big presence on YouTube, returns to our show. How serious are the regime in Tehran about killing this thing stone dead?
It is sadly fascinating, because it's no longer just the regime directly. It's actually, I know it's not real democracy, but it's still their parliament legislating, legalizing genocide. So on the one hand, you say, oh, impressive, because they don't have to bother with that. But they've essentially, the MPs got together with an open letter. They're not necessarily sentencing the current 15,000 political prisoners. They're basically legalizing the mechanism to do any of them that they want, but also beyond that, anyone who gets arrested today or tomorrow. But that's actually a sign of weakness, that they're losing control. Some people see it as, oh, that's very proactive. That means they're in control. They are crushing the rebellion. But actually, it's not. It's actually a sign of weakness.
When I think back to the Shah's last days, I remember Jimmy Carter refusing to sell the Shah rubber bullets because he'd been using them on the crowd. These guys are using real bullets, and they've already killed like over 300 people.
Yeah, and I mean, don't get me started with Jimmy Carter, because there was a reason he was doing that. He betrayed the Shah. And then there were evidence that came out after 20, 30 years that the CIA was partly, some of them, training the Ayatollahs to actually go back. And France...
Yeah, I mean, the CIA gets everything wrong. I remember them toppling
it's not even new anymore,
King Farouk in Egypt under the name Operation Fat Bleeper. I mean, that's how sophisticated the CIA are. They're tourists in every part of the world.
Yeah, but again, the main point was that towards the end, the Shah actually stopped, and he said, stop killing, and he actually said, I'm going to go away, I'm going to take a break, and that was actually, it ended up being a bad strategy, because that meant that they just basically took over and occupied. That's why Iranians call the current regime Islamic occupation. And it's quite interesting.
But are you surprised, for example, Joe Biden is all palsy-walsy with Tehran again after Trump said he didn't like the Iran deal and it was off. Are you surprised at the way Biden and the European Union still cozy up to these guys.
Yeah, I mean, they're still backing the regime. And it's quite interesting that, you've seen Justin Trudeau, his government, until literally 2 weeks ago, allowing the Islamic regime's relatives and families to flee. A lot of them already decided to flee to Canada. Under pressure, his government came and said, OK, we're going to stop it now. He even attended, Justin Trudeau, one of the marches. And same in Germany. Germany came out like, well, sanctions, we're going to go to the European Union, get the MEPs. But then it just came out that the Germans are still doing deals and negotiating with the Iranian regime. Like, so it's all for show, right? You're not actually doing anything about it, right?
Don't you get sick of it when they're actually, as we said, this is a women's revolution.
And children.
Basically, it's women who do not want to wear Islamic body bags every time they step out of the house. Why can't Western liberals get behind that?
Because it's awkward. It's politically incorrect. They don't want to offend the male people who are here from the Islamic world, because they think, well, if we support the women in Iran, that means we're going to offend some Muslims, for example. I mean, it's led by and sparked. It started with the women and then children. So Generation Z in Iran are more pro-freedom than in the West. But it's actually the widespread. The uprising is basically a cost of living crisis / just sick and tired of tyranny. And the interesting thing about this whole situation is that today, tomorrow and Thursday, there's an operation. They call it Reclaim the Capital. So people basically have been obviously seeing the clips and everything. So I actually tweeted the video on Twitter just now, but obviously we're in the green room. And for the first time, soldiers and security forces, a number of them refused to follow government orders to shoot and kill, and then protesters went and gave them flowers, red roses. Oh, so it's the same thing happened in 1979 towards the end. And protesters were like, give flowers to the soldiers. So you can see some similarities finally. The snowball has started.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. That in fact. It may simply be that it's too exhausted and the men required to enforce the tyranny no longer are willing to do so.
Exactly, and they've actually been more vocal. The pro-freedom revolutionaries essentially collectively have already announced that they are boycotting the Qatar World Cup for 2 reasons. One, Qatar tyranny. Right. Second reason, the Iranian football team that are still going, people are disappointed, saying they are not representing the nation, they're representing the regime. And Iran is in a group with England and USA. They said they're going to support England and the US against Iran and to send a signal.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that, because England shouldn't be going anyway. Nobody should be playing football in this tyrannous state. Thank you very much, Maya. We got some good news for you. Dan Wootton's here. What you got, Dan?
Mark Steyn, oh my goodness, you have been a very naughty boy tonight. You're getting me in trouble, Mark. As always.
Really?
As always.
Oh.
You know. But look, we have a plethora of big names tonight, Mark. I'm actually really excited about it. Lawrence Fox is here. He is launching a brand new campaign, actually, about wokery invading our schools. He doesn't call them schools anymore. He calls them indoctrination centres. So he's here on that. Megyn Kelly live from the US. Of course, we're just hours away from this big Trump potential presidential announcement. Robert Lacey. Now, do you know he is the historical advisor to the Crown. So he is going to hit back on Paul Burrell, who last night threw a lot of shade at him and the new series. Plus, the SAS Hardman cancelled by Channel 4 because he's not woke. Well, he's not cancelled here. Ant Middleton joins our superstar panel tonight.
That's fantastic. You do not lie, Dan. That is a plethora. That is a bona fide plethora right there. Fantastic stuff. The best late night show in telly, Dan Wootton, coming up for 2 hours, and it all starts right after the break. Stay safe, stay free.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been